Welcome to today's webcast, Managing Test Labs Without the Headache. My name is Colin Dembowski. I'm an ALM MVP based in East London, South Africa. I work for a company called Imaginet. I'll have more on Imaginet service offerings at the end of this webcast. My Twitter handle is Colin Dembowski, and I blog regularly to colinsalmcorner.com. Before we start today's webcast, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Imaginet. We have over 650 successful ALM customers and over 1,800 successful ALM engagements. We're a Microsoft Gold certified partner with the ALM competency, and in 2011 we were Microsoft's ALM Partner of the Year. We have only the highest level of expertise with Microsoft ALM technologies and a close working relationship with Microsoft. On staff, we have multiple Microsoft regional directors, TFS rangers, virtual technical specialists, and many Microsoft MVPs. Today we're going to be discussing standard labs in TFS 2013. I'll first discuss what standard labs are, then we'll look at how to create a lab and configure test settings. Then we'll look at how to do manual testing against a lab, and finally we'll tie everything together using the build, deploy, test workflow to build, deploy, and test our application, all using lab management. In today's scenario, we're going to track a requirement. The requirement is to add icons and a Celsius Fahrenheit converter to a weather page in an existing website. We have a couple of machines in our environment, a database server and a web server. They're both Hyper-V virtual machines, and we want to leverage lab management in order to manage the testing and the test environments. Let me open up Microsoft Test Manager. Here I'm connecting to the Fabricam Fiber team project. Instead of connecting to the test center, I'm going to connect to the lab center. The lab center shows me a list of all the labs that I've already configured. Let me show you how you would create a new lab. We'll click New Environment, and here we'll be able to specify which type of environment we want to create. There are two types of environment we can use with TFS 2013 Lab Management: standard environments and SCVMM environments. SCVMM environments require you to have Hyper-V and System Center Virtual Machine Manager, as well as configuration between TFS and SCVMM. The advantages of SCVMM environments is that you can use templates to deploy environments on the fly. You can isolate environments so that you can clone them and have multiple copies of the same environment with the same machine names on the network. And thirdly, you can use snapshotting to snapshot the environment. This would snapshot all the machines within the environment simultaneously. While there are distinct advantages to SCVM environments, they're a little harder to maintain because of the infrastructure and configuration requirements. Standard environments don't require any additional configuration and will work as soon as you've got TFS installed and configured. They allow you to use any existing machine you have on your network, be that a physical machine, a Hyper-V machine, a VMware machine. Let's type in a name. In this case, we'll call this Web Lab. On the Machines tab, we'll be able to add the machines that we want. I have a web server called Web Server that's got IIS configured, and I have a database machine called DB Server with SQL Server installed and configured. I'm going to have to supply a user that's an admin on both those machines. I've configured both machines to have an account called Lab Service in the administrators group. On machine properties, we can add tags to the machines. These can be used during testing and deployment. In our case, we don't need any. On the Advanced tab, I'll be able to select which machine I want to run UI tests in. Since we're headed towards running coded UI tests in the lab, I'm going to configure an agent on the web server to run in the interactive mode. By default, the agents that run on the machines will run as a service, but since this agent needs to interact with the desktop, I'm going to configure it to run in the interactive mode. Again, I'll use the lab service account. Summary just gives us a summary of what we've done. And if we hit next and verify, it'll go and verify that the machines are contactable and that the admin account is correct. When the wizard completes, we'll have a lab that looks like this. The test controller will have pushed the test agents onto the machines and wired them up. This is a great improvement over lab management from 2010 days, where you had to install 3 agents manually and do all the wiring up yourself. Now that the lab is ready, we can use it for automated deployment as well as test diagnostic collection. Let's discuss test settings. I'm going to go to the Test Settings tab, and you can see I've already got a set of test settings here. I'm going to open up the WebLab Manual and Teletrace settings. Test settings can be either manual or automated. In this case, they're manual settings. These are settings that will be used during manual test execution. On the Roles page, we get to select which roles we want to include in these test settings. Our web lab has 2 roles, database server and web server. In the bottom, you'll see that there's an extra role for manual testing called local, which is the machine that the tester is running from. I'll click to Data and Diagnostics. Here is where we can configure which diagnostic adapters are going to run on which role. For the local role, which is the machine running the Microsoft Test Manager tool that the tester is going to be running from, we're going to be collecting things like action logs, as well as a screen and voice recorder. This records a screen capture of what's happening on the tester's machine. As soon as we click Start Test, the screen will automatically be captured. If the tester pauses, the recording will be paused. When they stop, the recording will be uploaded to TFS and linked to the test run. This means that the tester is freed from having to do all of these things manually, creating a recording, naming the recording, loading the recording into some sort of shared location and linking it to a work item. All of that plumbing is going to be taken care of by the screen recorder diagnostic adapter. Of course, if I move over to the database role, I'm not going to record the screen since nothing's happening on that screen. On the web server role, we're going to collect IntelliTrace, since that's running IIS and there's some .NET code that'll be running there. You can also create your own diagnostic adapters if you so choose. Let's open up one of the automated test settings. On the roles page for automated test settings, you'll see that there's no local setting. This is because the automated test settings only use the machines that are configured in the lab. We also have to select the role on which to run our automated tests. I'm selecting the web server. Whatever automated tests we have configured are going to run on this machine. Again, we get to set which data and diagnostic adapters are going to run on which machines. Under the Advanced section, we can specify deployment scripts, pre- and post-test scripts, and so on. I won't configure any of those now. Now that we've configured our lab and our test settings, let's move over to Visual Studio and look at the code. I've got a few projects here in this solution. One is a database project, this fabricamfiber.schema. That contains my database schema as well as some test data. I've also got a web application, fabricamfiber.web, which is going to be deployed into IIS. You can see I've got a build definition that's going to do a build for us. If I open up the drop folder, you'll see that I have this DACPack file. This is the output from the database project, as well as this Fabricam Fiber Web Zip, which is the web deploy package for my website. Here are my in-progress work on the My Work pane. I can see that I'm busy with this task 250 to add weather type to forecast table. This task is linked to a product backlog item, the one to add icons in the Celsius Fahrenheit converter to our weather page. I also have a couple of edits. I've made the code changes necessary. I'm going to check these in. And we'll queue a new build to build that new version of our code. Our build is completed successfully. If I scroll down a bit, I can see the associated change set 58 for made weather changes, as well as task 250 and the product backlog item are now associated with this build. This build report answers the question of what's in the build. We'll see this later when we come to actually testing this. Let's open up the Test Explorer and create a new build definition. We'll call this one Fab Fiber Lab. I'm going to leave the trigger as manual. I don't have to worry about source settings or outputs since this build is not going to produce any outputs. And I'm going to change the template from the default template to the lab default template. This workflow is going to allow me to do automated deployment as well as automated testing if I so choose. To configure it, we'll open up the lab wizard. The first page asks us to select an environment. I'm going to select the web lab. You can see this revert to a specific snapshot of the environment which is grayed out. If this was an SCVMM environment, I'd be able to revert to a clean snapshot of my environment. Next, we get to select which binaries we're going to deploy. If I'm using some other build engine, I can just specify a shared location where the binaries are that I want to deploy. I don't have to use outputs from a team build. In our case, however, we have got a team build. It's this code build. We could queue a new build, or select one of the existing builds, or just leave this workflow to select whichever happens to be the latest build. Let's leave it on that setting. I'm going to enable deployment of the build. Deploying builds is not a trivial exercise. One of the main difficulties is remote deployment. If you're building an MSI package, for example, it's not easy to automate remote deployment of an MSI into another machine. Where lab management helps us is that the lab agent is sitting on each of the machines that we're going to target. And so each of those machines can run a local deployment script. So I'm going to add two scripts, one on my database server and one on my web server. The details of these scripts are not so important. Here you'd be able to put PowerShell script, BAT files, SQL command files, whatever it is that you're going to need to do to install your bits onto the various machines in your lab. My database server script is going to use SQL package exe, which comes with Microsoft SQL Server, and we'll use the DAC pack as the source to update the schema and insert test data. For the web server, I'm going to invoke the CMD file that gets created when we create a web deploy package. That's got all the settings that it needs to deploy the website into the IS sitting on web server that's running the web deployment agent. Again, this could just be an X copy if that's the way you deploy to your websites. Let's hit finish to save those settings. Let's go to the builds pane of Team Explorer and queue a new lab build. That's going to go and grab the bits from our code build and using the scripts we defined, go and deploy it onto the various machines. After that, we'll be able to test the application. Our build is completed. I'm going to click View Log just to expand the log. If I scroll up a bit, this first section is the result of the script running on the DB server machine. It's updated the schema as well as inserted some test data. The second script is the script that's run on the web server machine. This is the output from the web deploy log. You can see that it's deployed the website. So we have successfully automated deployment from our build bits onto the machines in our lab environment. Now we're able to go and test. Again, I'm going to open up the Test Manager tool, and this time I'm going to switch from the lab center to the testing center. Let's connect to the test plan for this iteration. Here's iteration 3 plan, the plan for our iteration 3. I only have one suite in this plan. It's a requirements-based suite, which means the suite is linked to the requirement for adding the icons in the Celsius Fahrenheit converter. I've got one test case called test weather conversion. Before I run that test case, I'm going to set some properties on the test plan. I'll switch over to the Properties tab, and here I'm going to specify in the manual runs which manual settings to use. Let's use the code coverage settings. I'm also going to specify that we're going to be testing using the web lab. Finally, I'm going to set the build. The build that we're testing is the FabFiber code build. We can actually specify which instance of the build we're going to use. I'm going to assign the first build to the plan. And then when the drop-down selects our latest build, which is the 1002 build, you can again see the work items that have been associated with that build. This is where a test manager or a test member can see whether they're interested in testing this particular build. In our case, we're wanting to test this product backlog item for the icons and Celsius Fahrenheit converter on our weather page. So I'll assign that to the plan. When I assign to the plan, I'll see this recommended test pop up. There's a diagnostic adapter called Test Impact Analysis. What Test Impact Analysis does is it monitors our tests as we run them. As I'm running the test, TFS is gathering information about which methods are hit by each test case. Then when a new build comes out, if code changes in the methods, it can work out backwards which test cases have been impacted by those code changes. This won't work for configuration changes or for database data changes, but it'll work for any managed code changes. I'm not going to view since I don't have any tests run yet. Let's save and close those properties. I'm going to move across to the Test tab, click on my test case, and select Run. That's going to launch the Test Runner tool. Let's close all our browsers. I'm going to select Create an Action Recording and hit Start Test. You can see it initializing here. This is initializing all the adapters across the various machines within our lab environment. Once initializing is complete, we're going to follow the steps. Let's open up a browser to that web URL. You'll notice that I'm hitting the IIS machine in our lab environment, which is web server. That step worked okay, so I'm going to mark it as a pass. Next, we're going to click Weather. And I can see that the icons now appear on this page. So I'm going to mark that step as a pass as well. Now we're going to click Fahrenheit. And nothing seems to have happened. It seems like we found a bug in our code. Let's mark that step as a failure. Write a comment. Let's take a screenshot. And finally, we'll create a bug. We'll just call this Fahrenheit bug. Not particularly descriptive, but that's okay, as we'll see in Visual Studio. We can then continue testing or decide that if the tests failed at this point, we're not going to test anymore. Let's abort the test run. Let's go back into Visual Studio. I'll open up the Team Explorer and we'll search for Fahrenheit. There's the Fahrenheit bug, which I'll open up. And even though the description wasn't particularly good, Fahrenheit bug, the steps to reproduce field is very rich. We can see exactly which steps have passed and which have failed. There's color highlighting to draw our attention. If we scroll down a bit further, we can see the comments that the table did not update. We can open up a screenshot. There we can see that Fahrenheit is selected, but the temperatures still appear to be in Celsius. And if that's still not convincing enough, we can open up the video. This will launch the attached video, and we can watch the test from this point. And there we can see that even though the test has clicked Fahrenheit, the table did not update. If I scroll down a bit further, we can see a whole bunch of other information. There's action logs, there's the video recording, there'd be IntelliTrace files here if we'd enabled the IntelliTrace collector. So very, very rich bugs. I'm going to fix that bug and create a new build. I've fixed the bug and run a new build for our code, 1003. Again, if I look down in the build report, I can see the change set, and because the change set was checked in associated with the bug is also associated with this build. Let's go and run our lab deployment build again so that we can deploy the new version of the build. Since this build is configured to deploy the latest version of the code build, it's going to pick up these new binaries and deploy them out. The build is completed. And if I open it up, I can see that it's deployed the code from the 1003 build. Let's go back into the Test Manager tool. I'm going to click on Verify Bugs. And here I can see that this bug is now in the committed state, which means that the developers claim to have fixed this bug. Let's go back to the properties of the plan and select the newest build. I'll hit Modify on the build selection, and here with build 1003 in the drop-down, I can again see that there's a bug associated with this build. I'm going to assign that to the plan. Again, we could view recommended tests, but since we don't have any passing tests, this is not going to yield any results. Let's go back to the Test tab, to the Verify Bugs, and I'm going to click on this Verify button. That's going to launch the test runner using the same test case that we were running when we found the bug. Again, let's make sure all our browsers are closed. I'm going to select Start Test, which again is going to initialize all the diagnostic adapters across my environment. And then I'm going to select the first 3 steps and hit play, since we've got an action recording. This is going to replay my actions, helping me fast forward through this manual test case. The first 2 steps passed, so I'll right click and pass them. The third step passed as well. We'll mark that as a pass. Finally, we'll close the browser. I'm going to end the test now. And we'll close the test runner. When we come back into Test Manager, it's going to ask us to transition the state of this bug. It was committed, and now we can verify that the bug was fixed by moving it into the done state. Let's take this one step further and automate that test case. I'm going to open up Visual Studio and open up my solution. I'm going to add a new project to the solution. So I'll right click, Add New Project, and from the Visual C# Test section, I'm going to select Coded UI Test Project. We'll call this Fab Fiber Coded UI. That'll create a Coded UI test project for us. A dialog pops up asking us whether we want to generate code or use an existing recording. I'm going to use the existing recording. I'll search for anything that contains the word weather, and there's our test weather conversion test case. I'll select OK to select the action recording from that test case. This has generated some code for us. We see 4 methods corresponding to the 4 steps in the test case. Let's rename this to test conversion, and I'll compile my solution. Now, one thing this test case doesn't have is any verification. I'm going to quickly show you how to add some verification. Just before closing the browser, we want to verify that the Fahrenheit conversion completed successfully. Let's get the web page to that point. Let's verify that this top left cell, the minimum for Monday, has changed from its Celsius value to 55. I'm going to insert a blank line just before close browser. I'll right click, select Generate Code for Coded UI Test, and use the Coded UI Test Builder. That's going to launch the test builder. I can use the record button to record additional actions. In this case, I'm going to use this target button to target the various controls on this interface. I'm going to let go over this cell, and we'll see some properties that are available to the automation framework. I'm going to add an assertion on the inner text, and I'm going to use the comparator r equal the value of 55, and the message for failure will be conversion failed. We'll select OK and generate the code for that validation method. We'll call this validate conversion. We'll hit add and generate. Now of course this will only work if the starting temperature is always the same. So we may want to add some code that can read the value of the starting cell. I'll do that by coming over here to just before we click Fahrenheit. I'll create a variable called Celsius, and we're going to use int.parse since we're going to be reading a string value. Which string value are we going to be reading? Well, if I open up the Solution Explorer and double click on the coded UI map, I'll see on the left hand side some actions, and on the right hand side the control map. If I open up the control map deep enough, I'll see that there's a UI item 55 cell. This is the cell that we're going to read. I'm going to right click and select the properties, and I'm going to change some of the search properties. You'll see that one of the search properties is that the inner text equals to 55. We'll remove that one since that's not always going to be the case. The remaining search properties are enough for the automation framework to find the top left cell in that table. Let's save our changes, and now we can walk down the UI map. UI map.ui weather window .ui forecast document .ui content .ui table .ui item cell 55, and the property we want to read is the inner text. Then we're going to apply a conversion to calculate what the Fahrenheit should be. The Fahrenheit value is equal to Celsius times 9 divided by 5 plus 32. That'll give us the Fahrenheit value. We're then going to want to override the default value for the validate conversion method. I can do this using the property that's generated. You'll see that there's a validate conversion method, and then there's a validate conversion expected values property, which is going to allow me to override the default for the UI item 55 cell inner text. And we'll override that using Fahrenheit toString. Let's go and check that code in. I'll use the comment added coded UI and hit check in. Let's go and queue a new build to build a new version of our application that includes the coded UI tests. While that build is running, let's go and automate the test case. The weather test case. There's our test weather conversion test case. And when I open it, I'm going to click on this associated automation. The associated automation allows me to select a method in my open solution that automates this particular test case. I'll click on this ellipsis button to open up a dialog. There's our test conversion coded UI test, but you can see that there's a list of unit tests as well. We don't have to have coded UI tests to test our test cases. We could use just plain unit tests. We'll select that one. That's going to change the state of this test case from not automated to automated. Our build is completed. If I open up the drop folder, you can see that the Fab Fiber coded UI DLL is now part of the drops for this particular build. This is important because when we run this in the lab is going to look in this location to find any automated code. Let's go and update the lab workflow. Come back to Team Explorer, and I'll edit the build definition for the Fab Fiber Lab build. Once again, we'll open up the build wizard. We'll leave the environment, build and deploy settings alone and go to test. And here we're going to select run tests in this environment. Now we get to select which plan contains our automated test cases. In this case, they live in the iteration 3 plan. And in which suite do they live? They live in this 249 add icon CF converted to weather page, which is our requirement suite that contains our automated test case. And finally, we'll be able to set which automated settings to use. We've already established WebLab automated settings for our automated test runs, so we'll use those ones. We'll save that build. We'll right-click the FabFiber Lab, build, and queue a new build. Let's use the environment viewer to connect to the web lab to see the test running on the web server machine. Come back to the test manager and move over to the lab center. Select the web lab and hit the connect button. I'll click on the web server icon and we'll log in as lab service. Here you can see the test agent that's running in the interactive mode. If you watch the test agent status, we'll see it change to deploying the build for the deployment phase and then to running test for it to run the tests. The agent is now being used to deploy the build. We can now see that the agent is running tests. We only have one test available, so there's only one test that has to be run. Now normally you wouldn't be watching your automated tests running, so perhaps you'd schedule this build so that it can run at 3 AM in the morning. So by the time you come into the office at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock, depending on when you get in, you'll be able to see the results of the automated run. If there's any failures, you'll have a video recording so you can watch exactly what's happening. You'd have IntelliTrace logs and any other diagnostic adapters output that you've configured. This will allow you to do continuous build, test and deployment. Let's switch back to the build to see what the build looks like when it's completed. The build is now completed successfully. If we expand test run details, we'll see the details of the test run. And if we click view test results, it'll open up the test results in Test Manager for us. And we'll be able to inspect exactly which tests run, as well as all the data accompanying the test runs. Thank you so much for attending today's webcast. I'll now hand over to Becky, who will tell you some more about our upcoming events and special offers.
Thank you, Colin. If you'd like to know more, if you enjoyed today's webinar and are interested in adopting lab management for your organization, Imaginet offers our Visual Studio Lab Management 15-day Quick Start. This Quick Start includes designing, installing, configuring, and using Microsoft's virtual lab management software. Imaginet will teach you the best practices for designing and implementing a virtual lab environment, all using Microsoft Lab Management and Team Foundation Server. This Quick Start also includes support and training for your team and also a high-level ALM assessment to give you a big picture view of how lab management will fit into your overall ALM vision. If you're interested, just email us at info@imaginet.com. Imaginet offers a variety of free webcasts and events. To get information on or to register for any of these free webcasts or events that we have coming up soon, please visit our website at www.imaginet.com/events. We're now covering a variety of topics including Visual Studio 2013, Team Foundation Server, Application Lifecycle Management, SharePoint, and also Microsoft.NET. In addition, Imaginet has a variety of upcoming training classes. We have an accredited core Kanban using Team Foundation Server 3-day class. These classes are held monthly in Dallas, Texas, and can also be brought on site privately for your company. We also have a tester's training class with Microsoft Visual Studio ALM tools. This is a 4-day class and is also held publicly in Dallas, Texas. And again, this class can be brought on site privately for your organization as well. For more information or to register for any of our upcoming classes, visit www.imaginet.com/training. Imaginet offers a huge variety of ALM planning and implementation services. We offer assessment and envisioning workshops, migration planning workshops, and deployment planning workshops. We can also assist you with any of your Team Foundation Server upgrades to the latest version, such as 2013. We also offer remote support and other quick start engagements for lab management, test manager, automated testing, load testing, quality assurance centers of excellence, and test centers of excellence. We also offer integration support for Team Foundation Server to other tools such as Microsoft Project and Quality Center. And finally, you can visit Imaginet's Visual Studio website, and this is truly your one-stop hub for any and all of your Visual Studio needs. Just visit visualstudio.imaginet.com. If you have any questions or need any more information at all, please feel free to contact us at info@imaginet.com or simply by calling 972-607-4830. Thanks again, and we hope to see you on another Imaginet webcast.